Okay, so I'm fitting a different engine and gearbox into my Morris Minor, and the car where the engine and gearbox came from has a cable clutch. The Morris Minor has a rod operated clutch mechanism. So I got the clutch cable from the donor car, and it was far too long, so this is the end that goes onto the clutch operating lever. This is the end which goes onto the pedal. I had to cut this much of the cable off to make it shorter, so I started by cutting off the nipple at the pedal end, and then I pulled out the centre core, pulled it all the way out, measured twice, measured again, and then cut off this much of the cable. Obviously then the inner cable was far too long, so then I measured again, and cut off this much from the inner cable, threaded it back through, and now I need to recreate this nipple which was on the end. So this was created using some kind of a piece of steel profile, and then it was pressed onto the cable, but obviously the other end is formed from soldered, obviously a piece of solder that's been formed in a cast. So for this end I'm going to use a piece of aluminium. I've drilled a hole in the aluminium there as a mould. I've made it from two pieces bolted together just in case it gets stuck. I can split the pieces apart and get the end out. I've had a couple of practices, and this is what I've managed to do. That was my first attempt. I found that it was much easier the easiest way of cutting the inner cable was using an angle grinder. If you use a hacksaw, you end up snatching the cable, and it just ends up looking a mess. It's like a badly packed fajita. So obviously you want a nice clean cut. I found the best thing to do was to use an angle grinder. So we'll do that now. I'm just demonstrating how to make the soldered nipple today. So that gives you a much cleaner cut than you would have achieved with a hacksaw. Okay, so one thing we need to bear in mind is that the solder tends to, by a capillary action, move up the pieces, the strands of the flexible cable, and ended up with you know, the end kind of 30-40 millimeters not being flexible. That might not be an issue in the application you're doing, but it's just something to bear in mind. The profile of this hole in the cast obviously needs to be the right size. In my application it needs to, the cable's going to go through this hole here, and then we're going to put the nipple on the end to stop it pulling back through. I made this little bracket just to, the other end of it obviously attaches onto the clutch cable, clutch pedal via this pin. So the other thing you need to bear in mind is that to stop the solder travelling so far up the cable, I've used a mole grip. Don't hold it too tight, otherwise you'll squash all the strands, but basically the idea is that some of the heat will be dissipated through there, and then the solder won't travel as far up. So just a bit of flux on there, and this is just flux and solder that I use for household plumbing, available from all good DIY stores. I don't know why, but putting flux into the mould seems to help everything along, even though we're not expecting the solder to adhere to the aluminium, because it won't. That's why I've used aluminium. So, like the blowtorch, I really need to get one with electronic ignition. Just heat up the solder. The flux starts to boil, then you'll be able to start having the solder in. Fill the mould with the solder. So we'll just heat up the end of the cable, get that flux warm, warm up the solder again. When it goes shiny on top, that normally means that it's molten. Cable touches it, it tends to solidify again, so you just need to keep the heat on. That's right, to the bottom of the mould now. So now we'll just hold it still until the solder solidifies. When it goes a dull colour on the surface, that normally means it's solidified. And there we go. As you can see, I can put my finger on the mould grips without it burning me, so that shows that a lot of the heat's been dissipated away from the cable. So hopefully that means the solder hasn't travelled as far up the strands as it did before. It's now cool enough to touch, so release it from there. And there we have the finished nipple. Okay, so here